The resume that changed everything. Prisha Sharma adjusted her glasses and smoothed down her kurta as she waited in the elegant living room of the Malhotra residence. The ceiling fan whirred softly above, doing little to calm her nerves. At 26, with a master's in mathematics and 3 years of tutoring experience, she should have felt confident. Yet something about this particular interview made her stomach flutter. "Ms. Sharma, sorry to keep you waiting." She looked up to see a tall man in his early 30s entering the room. Vikram Malhotra had a serious expression that softened slightly when he extended his hand. His eyes were tired but kind, crow's feet just beginning to form at the corners. "Thank you for considering my application, Mr. Malhotra," Prisha said, handing over her carefully prepared resume. "I understand your sister needs help with advanced calculus." Vikram nodded, settling into the armchair across from her. "Divya is brilliant but struggling to keep up after missing school due to illness. She's determined to pursue engineering, and I don't want her to fall behind." As he scanned her resume, Prisha observed him quietly. There was something guarded about him, a careful distance in his manner that suggested years of practiced restraint. His home reflected the same, tastefully decorated but impersonal, like a beautiful hotel room rather than a lived-in space. Suddenly, Vikram's fingers stilled on the page. His expression changed almost imperceptibly. "You volunteer at Ashadeep Children's Home?" he asked, his voice carefully neutral. Prisha brightened. "Yes, for almost 4 years now. I teach mathematics there every Sunday." She hesitated, then added softly, "My father was raised there. After he passed away 2 years ago, I felt drawn to continue his connection to the place." Something flickered across Vikram's face. Recognition, perhaps, or something deeper. He cleared his throat and continued reviewing her credentials, but his posture had shifted subtly. "Your qualifications are impressive," he said finally, placing the resume on the coffee table between them. "Divya's previous tutors were qualified on paper but lacked patience. She's spirited." Prisha smiled. "The best students often are. They question everything. That's how they truly learn." Their conversation flowed easily after that, discussing teaching approaches and Divya's specific challenges. Yet Prisha couldn't shake the feeling that something had changed the moment Ashadeep was mentioned. As she was leaving, Vikram hesitated at the door. "One more question, Ms. Sharma, why mathematics? Most volunteers at places like Ashadeep teach art or music." Prisha's smile was genuine. "Mathematics is a language of certainty in an uncertain world. For children who've experienced instability, there's comfort in knowing that some things are dependable, that 2 + 2 will always equal 4, no matter what else changes in their lives." Vikram stood very still, studying her face as though seeing her properly for the first time. "You start tomorrow," he said finally. 4 o'clock. Divya will be home from school by then." As Prisha walked down the tree-lined street toward the bus stop, she didn't realize that behind her, Vikram was still standing in the doorway, her resume in his hand, staring at the words "volunteer teacher at Ashadeep Children's Home," as though they contained a message meant only for him. Because they did. Connections. Beyond numbers, the Malhotra home felt different when Prisha arrived for Divya's first tutoring session. Soft classical music drifted from somewhere inside, and the scent of cardamom chai hung in the air. Vikram answered the door himself, more casually dressed than during their interview, in a simple blue button-down with rolled-up sleeves. "Divya's been talking about you all morning," he said, leading Prisha to a bright study overlooking a small garden. "I haven't seen her this excited about mathematics in months." Divya Malhotra turned out to be a spirited 16-year-old with intelligent eyes and her brother's reserved smile. Unlike Vikram's careful politeness, however, Divya's enthusiasm bubbled over immediately. "Paya says you teach at Ashadeep too," she said, arranging her textbooks. "That's so cool. He never tells me why, but he's always donating to that place." Vikram cleared his throat from the doorway. "I'll leave you two to it. There's chai and snacks in the kitchen when you need a break." Over the next 2 hours, Prisha discovered that Divya was indeed brilliant, quick to grasp concepts but impatient with the methodical process required for complex problems. By the session's end, they'd made surprising progress. "You're different from our other tutors," Divya said, stretching. "They just wanted me to memorize formulas. You make me understand why they work." When Prisha emerged from the study, She was surprised to find Vikram working at the dining table rather than in his home office. He looked up immediately as if he'd been waiting. "How did it go?"
he asked, closing his laptop. "Wonderfully."
Divya's natural talent for spatial reasoning is remarkable. She just needs to build confidence in her approach. Vikram nodded, seeming pleased but unsurprised by her assessment. He hesitated, then asked, "Would you like some chai before you go?" I'd like to hear more about your work at Ashadeep." Over steaming cups, Prisha described her Sunday classes at the children's home, teaching basic arithmetic to younger kids in the morning and helping older ones with advanced mathematics in the afternoon. "The older children particularly need someone who believes in them," she explained. "Many have internalized the idea that their circumstances define their potential." Vikram's fingers tightened around his cup. "And you don't believe that?" "Of course not. My father was proof of that. He came from nothing, yet became a respected mathematics professor." Her voice softened. "He always said Ashadeep gave him his foundation, both in education and in understanding what truly matters in life." Something in Vikram's expression made Prisha pause. There was a familiar pain there, quickly masked. "Mr. Malhotra, may I ask why you support Ashadeep? Divya mentioned your donations." For a moment she thought he wouldn't answer. Then quietly, "I spent 6 years there from age 8 to 14 after my parents died in an accident." His voice was matter-of-fact, but his eyes held shadows. "My grandfather eventually took custody of Divya and me, but those years, they shaped me." Understanding dawned. "That's why you reacted to my resume?" He nodded, a small vulnerable gesture that seemed to surprise even him. "I've never met anyone else connected to Ashadeep in my professional life. It was unexpected." When Prisha left that evening, something had shifted between them. A tentative bridge built on shared understanding. Walking to the bus stop, she realized she was smiling. Behind her academic passions and volunteer work, Prisha had kept people at a careful distance since her father's death. Yet something about Vikram's guarded nature and unexpected connection to her past made her curious to discover what lay beneath his carefully constructed facade. What she couldn't know was that Vikram had already called the director of Ashadeep, asking if they needed any renovation work done, and if they might welcome another volunteer this Sunday. Shadows of the past. Sunday morning at Ashadeep Children's Home always filled Prisha with a sense of purpose. The aging building with its faded yellow walls and cheerful hand-painted murals felt like a second home. She was setting up mathematics worksheets in the small classroom when a familiar figure appeared in the doorway. "Mr. Malhotra?" Prisha nearly dropped the stack of papers. "What are you doing here?" Vikram stood awkwardly, hands in his pockets. "I spoke with Director Joshi. He said they could use help with some structural repairs." He gestured vaguely toward a toolbox by his feet. "And please call me Vikram. Mr. Malhotra makes me feel like my grandfather." Throughout the morning, Prisha kept glancing through the window to where Vikram was repairing a sagging bookshelf. There was something different about him here. His movements more natural, his rare smile appearing more frequently when interacting with the children, who curiously observed his work. During lunch, they sat together on the bench beneath the old banyan tree in the courtyard, watching children play cricket with a worn tennis ball and makeshift wickets. "You're good with them," Prisha noted, as a small boy ran up to show Vikram the paper airplane he'd made, receiving patient instructions on improving its design. Vikram shrugged. "They remind me of myself." After a pause, he added, "And Divya, she was only 4 when we came here. I was 8. She doesn't remember much, but I remember everything." His voice held no self-pity, just a matter-of-factness that made Prisha's heart ache. She'd known loss with her father's passing, but she'd had 24 years with him. "Vikram had been just a child. What was it like for you here?" she asked softly. Vikram's eyes followed the children playing. "Initially terrifying, then safe in its own way. Routine became my anchor. Breakfast at 7, classes until 2, chores, homework, lights out at 9. His fingers tapped a rhythmic pattern on the bench. "I became obsessed with mathematics and engineering. Problems that had solutions, structures that could be fixed or built. Is that why you became an architect?" He nodded. "Buildings don't collapse if you design them properly. They're predictable. Unlike people," Prisha supplied. "Unlike people," he agreed, meeting her eyes briefly before looking away. Over the next few Sundays, their pattern continued. Vikram would repair something in the building, leaking pipes, broken chairs, cracked window frames, while Prisha taught her classes. Afterward, they'd share lunch and conversations that gradually deepened. She learned that after university, Vikram had built his architectural firm from nothing, supporting Divya and creating the stability he'd craved as a child. In turn, she told him about losing her father to heart failure and how teaching at Ashadeep helped her process her grief. What remained unspoken was the growing connection between them, a delicate thread neither seemed ready to acknowledge. One rainy afternoon, as they sorted through donated textbooks in the library, Director Joshi stopped by with a worn photo album. "Found this while clearing the storage room," he said, setting it before Vikram. "Thought you might like to see it." After the director left, Vikram stared at the closed album, his hand hovering over the cover without touching it. "We don't have to look," Prisha said gently. "No, it's fine." His voice was tight. "It's just the past." But when they opened it, the past came alive in faded photographs. Annual celebration days, classroom activities, children in outdated uniforms standing in neat rows. Halfway through, Vikram suddenly stopped turning pages. There, in a group photo, stood a solemn-faced boy with Vikram's eyes, arm protectively around a tiny girl with pigtails. "Divya should see these," Prisha said softly. Vikram shook his head. "She's built a perfect image of our parents, of our life before. These would only remind her of what she lost, or show her what she gained, a brother who protected her through everything." His eyes, when they met hers, held years of unspoken pain. "Some things are better left in the past, Prisha." Later, as they left Ashadeep in the fading light, raindrops still clinging to the leaves of the banyan tree, Prisha understood that despite their growing closeness, Vikram still kept parts of himself locked away, shadows of the past he wasn't ready to bring into the light. What she couldn't know was that later that night, Vikram returned to Director Joshi and borrowed the photo album, sitting alone in his living room until dawn, facing memories he'd spent decades trying to forget. The bridge between two hearts 3 months into Divya's tutoring, Prisha had become a fixture in the Malhotra household. Her sessions with Divya had expanded beyond mathematics to include physics and chemistry, the girl's grades steadily climbing. But it was the hours after tutoring, sharing chai with Vikram, discussing books, architecture, and gradually, their lives, that Prisha found herself anticipating most. On a rain-soaked Tuesday, Prisha arrived to find not Divya but Vikram waiting. Concern etched across his face. "Director Joshi called," he said without preamble. "There's been a major plumbing failure at Ashadeep. The ground floor is flooded and they've had to move all the children to the second-floor dormitories." Prisha set down her bag immediately. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough that the municipal inspector is threatening to condemn the building. Joshi's desperate. They have no funds for the scale of repairs needed, and nowhere to relocate 28 children." Something changed in Vikram's expression as he spoke, the careful distance he maintained giving way to raw determination. "I've been working on some preliminary plans," he continued, leading her to the dining table where architectural drawings were spread out. "The building's foundation is still sound, but the plumbing system is original to the 1970s structure. It needs a complete overhaul." Prisha studied the detailed plans, recognizing his professional expertise but also something more personal in the careful attention to creating improved spaces for the children. "This would cost more than their annual operating budget," Vikram finished. "But I've been making some calls. My firm can donate the design work and project management. I have suppliers willing to provide materials at cost." He hesitated. "It's still not enough." Their eyes met in shared understanding. "We need to raise funds," Prisha said, quickly. The next 2 weeks became a whirlwind. Tutoring sessions were postponed as Divya enthusiastically joined their improvised fundraising campaign. Prisha activated her network of fellow educators, while Vikram approached his business associates. They created a detailed presentation showing Ashadeep's impact over decades, including statistics on former residents now contributing to society. "Like you," Prisha said softly one night as they worked late in Vikram's home office. He looked up, shadows under his eyes from days of minimal sleep. "And your father?" "You never asked his name," she realized suddenly. "Aditya Sharma," Vikram said without hesitation, mathematics professor at Delhi University. He left Ashadeep in 1989, returned to volunteer in the late 90s. He created the first structured mathematics curriculum for the home. At her surprised expression, he added quietly, "I looked him up. He was there during my time, though I was too young to be in his advanced classes." The simple revelation that he had researched this connection between them touched Prisha deeply. On the night before their community fundraising event, disaster struck. The municipal inspector issued a final notice: either commence repairs within 10 days or the children would be separated and sent to various state facilities across the region. Prisha found Vikram alone on his balcony staring into the night. "We'll find a way," she said, joining him at the railing. "It's not just about the building." His voice was rough with emotion. "Ashadeep works because it keeps children together, creates a family. Being separated from Divya was my greatest fear during those years." He turned to her, vulnerability naked on his face. "The thought of those children being split apart?" Without thinking, Prisha reached for his hand. "Then we won't let it happen." The moment stretched between them, his fingers warm against hers. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible. "I've kept everyone at a distance for so long, built walls stronger than any I've designed professionally." His eyes, when they met hers, held both fear and hope. "But with you, those walls keep crumbling." The fundraiser exceeded their most optimistic projections. Vikram's professional reputation and Prisha's passionate advocacy combined powerfully, resulting in donations sufficient not just for emergency repairs, but for comprehensive renovations. When they announced the total to Director Joshi, the older man wept openly. Later that evening, standing amid the emptying venue, Vikram turned to Prisha. "There's something I need to show you." He drove them to Ashadeep, where emergency pumps had finally cleared most of the water. In the dim light of the administrative office, he pulled out a weathered wooden box. "I found this while helping move documents to higher ground," he explained. Opening it carefully, inside lay children's artwork, preserved admission records, and a stack of letters. Vikram selected one, unfolding it with reverent care. "This is a letter my father wrote to Ashadeep's director before he died," he said, voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "He knew what was coming and made arrangements for us. He wrote, 'My children must stay together. They are each other's anchors in this storm.'" Prisha listened silently as Vikram finally shared the full story of his past, not as disconnected facts, but as the emotional journey that had shaped him. When he finished, something had fundamentally shifted between them. The bridge connecting their hearts, built carefully over months of shared purpose, had finally become strong enough to cross. Full Circle Spring arrived in a burst of color, transforming the newly renovated grounds of Ashadeep Children's Home. Where once stood a crumbling structure with peeling paint, now gleamed a revitalized building with reinforced foundations, modern plumbing, and bright classrooms equipped with new learning materials. The renovation had taken 4 months of intensive work. But as Prisha watched children playing in the courtyard garden they'd planted together, every exhausting moment felt worthwhile. "Ms. Prisha, look what I solved!" 9-year-old Tanvi raced toward her, clutching a mathematics workbook. The girl had arrived at Ashadeep just before the flooding crisis, withdrawn and struggling academically after losing her mother to illness. Now her eyes sparkled with pride as she showed off her completed geometry problems. "Brilliant work, Tanvi." Prisha examined the careful calculations. "You've mastered the concept perfectly." "Mr. Vikram helped me understand how architects use these shapes," Tanvi explained, pointing to a small drawing in the margin. "He says I could design buildings someday too." Prisha smiled, glancing across the courtyard where Vikram was helping older boys install a basketball hoop, his formal architect's demeanor replaced by genuine engagement. In these past months, she'd watched him gradually shed the protective layers he'd built around himself, rediscovering parts of his identity he'd long suppressed. The transformation of Ashadeep had catalyzed a parallel transformation in their relationship. What began as professional respect had deepened through their shared mission, nights spent working side by side on fundraising strategies and renovation plans, their conversations extending far beyond the immediate project to dreams, fears, and hopes neither had shared with anyone else. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Vikram appeared beside her, wiping his hands on a rag. The afternoon sunlight caught the new strands of silver at his temples. physical evidence of the stress they'd navigated together. "Just admiring what we've accomplished," she replied. "Not just the building, but the program expansions. The new scholarship fund. All of it." Vikram's architectural expertise had transformed Ashadeep's physical structure, while Prisha's educational background had revitalized its academic program. Together they'd created something neither could have achieved alone. "Director Joshi wants to speak with us," Vikram said, nodding toward the administrative building. "Something about a proposal." In Joshi's newly organized office, the elderly director beamed at them across his desk. "The board has been discussing Ashadeep's future," he began, adjusting his glasses. "I'm not getting any younger, and after 30 years, I'm ready to step back." Prisha and Vikram exchanged concerned glances. "We want to establish a formal foundation to oversee Ashadeep's operations," Joshi continued, "with a focus on expanding educational opportunities for our children, and perhaps eventually supporting similar homes across the region." He leaned forward. "We'd like you both to consider leading this initiative." The proposal was unexpected, yet somehow inevitable, a natural evolution of their involvement. After promising to consider it carefully, they walked together through Ashadeep's garden, processing the possibilities. "It would mean significant career changes for both of us," Vikram said thoughtfully. "I'd need to restructure my firm, delegate more projects." Prisha nodded. "I'd have to reduce my university teaching load, possibly shift to research focused on educational models for vulnerable children." She hesitated. "It's a major commitment, not just professionally," Vikram added softly. The unspoken question hung between them. They'd been carefully navigating the changing nature of their relationship, neither rushing to define what was growing between them despite the obvious depth of their connection. They stopped beneath the banyan tree, the same one where they'd shared countless conversations over the past months. Newly installed stone benches surrounded its massive trunk, creating a peaceful reading area for the children. "My father used to say that life moves in circles," Prisha said, running her fingers along the smooth stone. "That we often find ourselves returning to beginnings we didn't recognize the first time around." Vikram took her hand, his touch now familiar and grounding. "When you walked into my house with that resume, I had no idea how completely my life was about to change." His voice held wonder rather than regret. "I spent decades building a successful career, creating financial security, making sure Divya had everything she needed. But something was missing. What was that?" Prisha asked, though she thought she knew the answer. "Purpose beyond survival, connection beyond obligation." His eyes, when they met hers, held certainty that had replaced his former guardedness. "You brought Ashadeep back into my life, but more importantly, you showed me it was possible to honor the past without being imprisoned by it." In the fading afternoon light, with children's laughter floating through the air, Vikram reached into his pocket and withdrew a small, worn photograph himself and Divya as children at Ashadeep, standing beneath this very tree. "I used to think happiness was too fragile to trust," he said, looking between the old photograph and the renovated grounds around them, "that anything built on emotion would eventually collapse." Prisha smiled. "Like poorly designed architecture?" "Exactly." His answering smile held newfound peace. "But I've learned that the strongest foundations aren't built on the absence of vulnerability, but on shared purpose and trust." He took both her hands in his. "I love you, Prisha, not just for what you've done for Ashadeep or for me, but for who you are, your compassion, your brilliance, your unwavering belief that everyone deserves a chance to rebuild." The words she'd been waiting to hear, yet they still took her breath away. "I love you too," she whispered. "All of you, your strength, your dedication, the walls you built to survive, and the courage it took to let them down." As the setting sun cast golden light through the banyan leaves, they discussed their vision for the foundation, a program that would provide educational pathways for children like they once were, breaking cycles of loss through opportunity and mentorship. That evening, they sat with Divya in the Malhotra living room, sharing Joshi's proposal and their evolving plans. The teenager listened intently, asking insightful questions about organizational structure and educational philosophy that reflected her growing maturity. "So," Divya said finally, with the directness of youth, "does this mean you two are officially together now? Because honestly, it's been painful watching you dance around it for months." Vikram laughed, a full, unreserved sound that Prisha had once thought rare but now recognized as healing. Yes, he said, taking Prisha's hand. We're building something together in every sense. Later, as they stood on the balcony watching the city lights, Prisha thought about the invisible threads that had brought them together. Her father's legacy, Vikram's childhood, a single line on a resume that had changed everything. What had begun as separate journeys had converged into a shared path, proving that sometimes life's most profound connections begin in the most unexpected places. The circle had completed itself, yet it was also just beginning.